welcome to Dragons,
Unicorns,
and Other Creative Creatures. Speaking of creative creatures, I'm here with Rona Gofstein.
And I'm here with Dr. Kevin, very creative creature.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're going to be talking about creativity and the power of creativity today, just you and I having a little discussion.
Yeah.
I wanted to actually start it. We talked recently on a show that I wanted to start an inspiration motivational piece.
Yes.
And I'm going to share one of my pieces of poetry, actually.
I love that.
To introduce some of what we're going to be talking about today. And it's called The Right Thing. When your lips move and I hear your soul sing, I know you're doing the right thing. When your eyes dance, you play all out, taking the chance, I know you are doing the right thing. And if you discover when you arrive, even though you are now fully alive, it was not where you thought you'd go, it does not mean you were not doing the right thing. And when the jealous and the naysayers, those who are but fear purveyors, are putting you down, remember you are doing the right thing. So when your lips move and you hear your soul sing, simply know you're doing the right thing. So what do you think?
I think that's the essence of creativity. You do have to get to that place where you simply know you're doing the right thing. And I think that can be, it tends to be the area for the young and the older. You know, the young just know they're doing the right thing. Whatever they've dreamed up, whatever they've imagined, whatever they see in their heads is right.
Yep.
And then we go through this period of those naysayers.
Yep.
Those jealous purveyors, oh my gosh, that's unfortunately way too common. Some of us face those very young and for a long time. Mm-hmm. Some of us get them later, but then it takes a while for us to get back to simply knowing that we're doing the right thing. There's a lot of noise in our heads and fear and judgment. You know, we take those critics or those outside voices with us. I think some of us for a very long time, some less, if we're fortunate. But I think that when creativity is at its best for me, it's because I'm not thinking about that. I am just knowing that I'm doing the right thing. Even if, you know, and for me as a writer, it might not be, you know, the final thing. It's, you know, there's drafts and there's edits and all this stuff, but it's still the right thing.
It's the process. Well, you know, there's this whole saying, and I don't completely agree with it as someone who's worked as a teacher before and does do teaching. That says, you know, those who can do and those who can't teach. But I do feel that oftentimes you have people that are frustrated creatives that go in and teach to kids art, because if a real artist was teaching kids art, you wouldn't have, I know I wouldn't run across so many people, so many kids in my practice or so many adults in my practice who's still little inner child, who's remembering the teacher who told them they had no creativity or they couldn't paint
Right.
or it was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, is it any wonder that the adult coloring book craze just it just took off in so many ways. Even the planner industry, I don't know, this isn't something you would have seen. A little over a year ago now, I discovered something called bullet journaling, which is an analog way. It was founded by a man named Ryder Carroll, and it's a very simple way of keeping organized.
Yep.
But women and other creatives went nuts with it, and you can fall into a rabbit hole of Instagram and Pinterest pictures of how to do layouts and stuff like that. So I have my monthly layout and my weekly and my dailies, and it's so much more creative and so much more me and what I need than any other plan. I couldn't use planners from the time I stopped doing traditional 9-to-5 work until I started bullet journaling. And it's because I can put some creative in it, because I can change it up every week. And it's the number of people, you can go into a Michael's now and find planner pieces, stickers and washi tapes and pens just for doing planners. People have taken that everyday need to know what you're going to do and what you're going to do next, and found a way to make it creative and beautiful. I know people who create mood mandalas. They make circles, and then every day, whatever they're feeling, they pick a color that they've assigned to happy, sad, frustrated, blah, and they color it and then they do the design on it. And so at the end of the month, they can have a visualization of getting through their moods and moving through them. And it's amazing how creativity has been added to that.
Yep. To that,
I love it.
To that field. And it's interesting because I think when I teach some of my higher level classes, and I'm teaching my students how to do note taking. And so you're sitting there and you're with a client and you're trying to keep on touch, and I'm teaching my students to do multiple different things. This is all in the Wei Qi healing. And so as somebody is having a treatment series, you know, your intuitive is speaking to you, your intellect is speaking to you. There are things I'm having them to look for and stuff like that.
Yes.
And so I'm teaching note taking as one of the segments of the Wei Qi healing system that I created. And I'm like, okay, so what I want you to do is, you don't have to use my colors, but I want you to have 5 to 7 colors. And you're going to say, okay, so this is an intuitive that came to me, and it's going to be in this color. And this is an observation, and this is going to be in this color. And this is going to be something that I want to turn into a homework assignment, so this is going to be in this color, and this is going to be in this color. And then you have certain shapes, and those shapes are a little shortcut for you to know that this is how you're applying. Because, you know, I mean, people that study the system with me to be able to do a Wei Qi treatment healing session process, which ideally is 7 2-hour treatments done over moon cycles.
Yep.
Okay, so this is you know, a lot of really getting into it with the people. And in doing that there are so many different things is that so creating this, you look and your notes are like a work of art as you're going along.
And it's going to re-inspire and reconnect you to what you wrote and why you wrote it and what you were feeling. And, you know, when you can add that creativity to the everyday, to the quote unquote mundane, it's amazing what a lasting difference it can make to you and what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, and, you know, and it's so interesting because, you know, one of the death knells oftentimes to creativity is this education system we have, which so confuses subjective and objective.
Yes.
And so...
And rates one is more important than the other.
Yes. Well, but it confuses it.
Yes.
I mean, really okay, so I, as the teacher of this 6th grade class, am going to declare that this is what a work of art should look like, or this is what a play should look like, or this is what a book should look like.
Yep.
And they get them off a list of other people that have made an assessment. And sometimes, of course, you know, they may be choosing plays or sonnets or books or works of art that don't speak to today's 6th grader, that have no meaning. You watch the creative teacher open this up and say, so I'm going to give you, you can choose any book to read for your book report, but you have to get it approved that it does follow a certain criteria. It has to be at a certain level. There are things that I need to teach out of it, but it doesn't have to be Call of the Wild.
Thank God.
You know?
Yes, no, it's true. I mean, I had somebody recently post, and she was so pleased her 9th graders reading Wuthering Heights, and I thought, why? What's anybody going to get out of, unless they really want to, unless they happen to like Gothic, or unless they, you know, what is somebody who's 14 today really going to get out of Wuthering Heights?
Well, and again, you know, that goes back to when children are forming and growing their own creative side and self. And they all have them.
Oh, yeah.
And some subjective and at this day and time could be arbitrary declaration of what is good and what is bad that can't be defended, you know, cannot be defended, and then say, well, this is good. Well, so you've just been presented it like it's a true statement instead of an opinion.
And kids, you know, don't, you know, what mom and dad says, what a teacher says, you know, most of them aren't going to think to question that. it's a truth.
Yeah.
It's an automatic, it's a given, and it will be a long time, if ever, that they stop and think, was that right? And was that right for me? Which are two different questions, but.
Well, and one of the things that I think about is there are those things that come and go. You were talking about Wuthering Heights. Is it today? What makes an example of good writing? Are you breaking it down? Are you saying these are the points that you want to look at? There was character development. There was this. There was that. Are you teaching the structure of writing when you do it? I mean, what are they supposed to be getting out of it?
Right, because they're certainly not going to write like that, hopefully. So yeah, exactly.
But in breaking all of this down and making these declarations, art is vulnerability.
Yes.
And so when somebody is when a young person is evolving their style, their way, if it doesn't fall into this declaration of, from the gods of this is what a good story is, and I have seen and heard and have firsthand knowledge of examples where, some kid in a creative writing class will write a story that is just so close to one of the teacher's favorite books, and there's no little, and they'll be hailed for almost plagiarism because they had all of the elements of the story.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. But then I look at the other side and I go, okay, so who really deserves to have that stamp? And I have to say, yeah, as crazy it is, Shakespeare, because he keeps on living and people keep on redoing the work.
And reinterpreting it and thinking, right, Shakespeare is relevant to read and reread because not necessarily for the language, but for the characters, but for how we deal with intense emotions, with tragedy, with history, how we deal with what's going on around us from every age too, because some of his heroes and heroines are quite young.
Yeah.
And some of them are very, very old. And so there's, and the fact that they keep retelling it.
They keep retelling this story, and they bring the story forward, and they create musicals out of it, like West Side Story, and they create, movies out of it that have the same title or a different title, but it's a different set, it's a different time.
They change the genders, they change, as you said, the time period. Or you can get really funny and silly with it. They did garden gnomes. Gnomeo and Juliet.
Oy, really?
Yeah, it's not great, but Elton John did the soundtrack, so it's got some moments.
Well, but
even The Lion King, somebody once said, it's Disney meets Hamlet. It's the uncle killing the father to take over the throne, and.
Yep. So there are some stories that seem to live on.
Because they get to the heart of who and what we are, and the things that we continue to explore about ourselves.
But if you look at the original Shakespeare and you're taking the original production, is it in today's languaging well written?
In today's language, well, he made up a lot of words, like Dr. Seuss. It's like saying, is Dr. Seuss well written?
Yeah.
In that sense, and no, I'm not comparing Shakespeare to Dr. Seuss, but
Dr. Seuss is very relieved at that, by the way.
Sure,
I'm just doing a moment of mediumship here.
Oh, good.
Yeah, go ahead.
But both of them wrote for the emotions of their audience very well.
Yes. And so there are things that become classics because they stand not a subjective stamp of an approval, sometimes by a frustrated artist or writer who has become a teacher.
Yep.
But because they stood the test of time, because people keep on wanting to keep the story alive.
Yeah.
And, in some of Shakespeare, you can date some of those plot lines back to the Greek mythologies.
Absolutely. And we've discussed, actually in the past, we've discussed the stories of the Bible even. People do interpret, reinterpret, look at that. I mean, talk about a book that keeps getting, used in negative ways too, but there are still stories in there that deserve time and looking at it and, are there... but if you read it in its original Latins or Hebrew and stuff like that, God, there are some very, very long, boring sections in there.
Well, I mean, does anybody even still read the original language of the Bible? Aramaic, I think it's Aramaic.
It may be, but Hebrew certainly.
It's a dead language.
We do still read it in Hebrew, but stories of things like how Rebecca dealt with her twins and sibling rivalry and the love between a husband and wife and, making your fortune or going out into the world or trusting when there's no, believing, when others around you don't and stuff like that. Some of the underlying aspects of the stories, if you get away from the dogma, are still going to be stories that we want to read and tell and wonder about. And
I don't mind whether the lessons that people draw upon that give them clues and insights and guidance on how to live life. I don't care whether they come from the Greek mythos or Aesop's fables or the biblical mythos, as long as we don't confuse it with reality.
No, it's a story from which we need to be learned. I mean, there are people who, who disagree, but as far as I'm concerned, the stories in the Bible were chosen by men, and they were chosen for a reason, which is fine.
And man chose
like any other anthology.
And
I'm gonna get so much trouble for calling a Bible an anthology.
Well, and some of the stories were taken out because of whoever the males, and it was mostly males, in charge at the time.
At the time, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever looked into, that there were female apostles and female books in the Bible, and they somehow disappeared because,
Nope, men were going to make this decision now, and poof, bye-bye.
There you go.
And it's great when writers go back. I do know writers who have gone back to the Bible and looked to write the stories of the women who have no voice in them. Anita Diamond's The Red Tent is one of the best examples of it. That is the story of Dinah, who is Jacob's only daughter. So, she's like 2 paragraphs when you actually read the Bible. So she gave her a story. I know another writer who did Lot's wife and gave her a voice. So there are, and I know people who've done that with, you talked about other mythos, certainly people who have done it with the Maid Marian story, the Robin Hood story from Maid Marian's point of view. And we had Laura.
I was going to say, who was the author?
Laura Fadolfi, who
Laura
has taken, mythos and given it a different voice and a new voice and a retelling and a revitalization, a new way to think about it, a new way to interpret it, a new way to look at it.
Well, and everything is a reflection of the time. And this is one of the reasons why I have a resistance, even in my own work, to go back and rewrite a poem I wrote 30 years ago, because I'm not that person, or rewrite a story.
Right, and you've said that, which is fascinating too, because the poem becomes who you were then, and that's important. That's an important moment in that time, in your time.
So what do you think, you know how I feel about some of the unicorn.
One day, guys.
Squishy.
One day, I'm going to cover. He's killing me. He's killing me. I'm going to cover this place with the cute, fuzzy, chibi unicorns, just to. Really?
What? What are you talking about?
It's you, strangely enough.
But why do you think that, unicorns became such a ridiculous creature when at one point they were such a majestic, magical creature? And there are as many good dragons in history as there are bad ones, but dragons get a bad rap, and unicorns today are getting bad wrappings.
They are. They're just, everything is that unicorn skin. If you go into any of the in the malls, like Claire's and Icing, which focus on a teen and tween audience, and jewelry and accessories, you get tons of holographic unicorn skinny. Killing me.
What? Well, I don't know.
What, he says. But, but you're right, it is a reflection. It does change, Angels are another one. You have the fierce sword-wielding guardian version, and then you have the benevolent, So, are dragons and unicorns, fierce protective creatures? Are they soft, squishy creatures? Well, the answer is yes, of course, but in whose hands and what time? And
well, it's, and
I think our need for dragons and unicorns fascinates me. Supposedly we've proven that, they don't exist. Although somebody pointed out to me, because I did those mermaid books, 70% of the ocean is unexplored, so no proof yet that they don't have mermaids. And then there's narwhals, who definitely have a very unicorn look, not the body, but the whole. So, why, of all the animals in mythology, of the griffins and the basilisks and all the different, hydras out there, dragons and unicorns, there's something about them for us.
Well, I mean, and I think that, well, there's a couple of things, and I think it's at 38 or 39 now, I have my file on my computer of different books I've started writing. I think it's like at 38 or 39 now. Some are
I don't even count.
90% done, some are just in like beginnings, and others are done along the way, and they're kind of like, when I'm feeling wicked creative, I'll go through and see which one I want to, which one do I want to work on, because none of them are, have a time deadline date to them. But one of the books I wanted to work on was why we created monsters, and the psyche of why we created monsters.
It's a very important concept. There's the idea that, we teach our children fairy tales not to teach them that monsters exist, but to teach them that monsters can be defeated. So why do we create monsters? Do we create them? Well, it's like horror as a genre, which we've discussed. Do we create something scarier than what we're feeling so that we have that relief? Like screaming on a roller coaster, or.
But one of the approaches I use, and I'm going to get back to dragons and unicorns, is that every quote unquote monster that has been created is a representation of something that is energetically happening in the human consciousness, and we had to find a form for it.
Yes.
We had to find the form for it, and so that these things does exist. And so then we look at things like dragons and unicorns. Now, if you would, and I don't say this as, if you would ever, because I know it's not your style, but if you had ever read my book, Experiment Earth, it talks about a period of time in Lemuria where animals that would not normally mated were forced to mate, and created some of the things that came down into human consciousness.
There you go.
And that, we had flying reptiles. They were called dinosaurs. What is a dragon? It's a flying reptile.
Yeah. Is this an atavistic memory even? Some people have claimed that, of things that did exist.
Or
things that almost killed us, because let's face it, the dragons, the mammals that were around when the dragons were around were much smaller, nocturnal, and very scared of those things.
Yeah. So you look at it and you go and you say, well, is there some kind of chemical reaction or something that would happen where certain things would make a glow come from the mouth, which would be a fire-breathing dragon.
Right.
Did they have to really breathe fire, or did they have to have the illusion that they look like they breathe fire? Because if I was ancient man tapping into a collective consciousness, and there was this big, huge reptilian type animal flying, and something happened and it looked like flames were coming out of their mouth, I don't think I'd get close enough to see if I could roast my marshmallow.
Or to see if did I see that right? I don't care if I saw it right. It's scary enough, I'm out of here. Really, because all it would take, some of the scales probably potentially would have had an iridescence to them.
Yes.
And at the right angle, at the right time, you're going to see something that's just going to make you go, I'm going the other way. I'm going back into that hole. I'm not coming out till these things are asleep at night.
And and if they were flying during lightning or thunderstorms.
There you go. That's all it would have taken, is the right viewing at the wrong time.
Yep. And so they become, so where does the mythos come from? Especially when you do things and you study things and you go, but every ancient culture had a version of dragon.
Which fascinates me, that there's all this crossover.
Yes. And
there's Garden of Eden stories in every culture. There are flood stories in every culture. There are dragon and unicorn and angels and all of these things. They cross. I love it, actually. I think it's one of the things that should unify us.
And going back to what we were talking about before, there is a Son of God, dying, resurrecting story in every culture. They existed hundreds of years before it showed up in...
Absolutely. Because, of all the things we have been able to explain by science, you look at the Greek mythology, well, now we know why the sun rises and sets, and now we know why the seasons turn, and so we don't have to have a story about poor Demeter and her daughter down in Hades, and so we have a science for it. But death, we still have nothing but what it is, and that's it. And the finality of it and all of that. And so the mythoses that surround that and the idea of coming back or resurrection or I'm blanking on the word. This is terrible, so not fair. Reincarnation, we can't quite let those go yet.
Well, in the Second Catholic Congress of 525 AD, Emperor Justinian made a decision that all references to reincarnation would be taken out of the Bible, and part of that reason was because if man knew that he was coming back, then he would not be as servile to the church. He would think he would have a chance to come back and do it again. But the original writings that existed, some of the most...
And again, this is man choosing what stories to tell. And by man, I mean human. Choosing what stories
to tell.
And
so we look at it, and some of this we know they were fascinating. If you look at some of the recordings when when the changeover in Christianity was and Islam was breaking off as the two warring children of Judaism, and they were starting to solidify, and they were trying to create their own, the temple became the church and the mosque,
right,
type of thing. There are some very well recorded observations that were done from the wise people out of India. There were observers that went and have recorded, and they're in the historical books in India of what was going on. That's how we know what some of the discussions were that led to the decisions that were made by people like Emperor Justinian,
yep,
and that different things, and that they actually, I heard a sage or a wise person, whatever, who was brought up and was from a very high religious caste out of India, speaking at Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. And this was in the 90s. No, 80s. It was in the 80s, and I was down there looking at...
Sadly, that's become a long time ago.
And so what happened is that there was actually discussion that they didn't want priests marrying because if they, or being in relationships with women that might produce children.
Okay.
Because then the children would have a claim on the church and the things of the church. And so they basically set up that what they wanted was they wanted homosexual men to be priests. There was no original that they couldn't be having sex with each other. That was not part of the original discussions back in the 500s AD. It was they're nurturing, they're caretaking, and they're not going to produce people that are going to come back to the church and say, my
father was.
Yep. My the father of my children was a priest, and now we're in poverty, and the priest is dead, and you need to take care of us. So they, ahead of time, made a decision that priests should be homosexuals because they were worried about the wealth of the church.
And it's interesting.
But that's all recorded.
That's right, and it disappears, and and we're back again, in this marvelous circle to what lasts, what doesn't last, what do we interpret, what do we reinterpret, what do we talk about, and how do we continue to create?
Creation. It lives within all of us. We are all creators, whether we create songs or dances, children, or grow flowers and create lovely arrangements of them. Mm-hmm. We were born to create, and we will create something till the day we die, even if it's just trouble. We're always creating something. A creator is live and well in you, and you might want to get on a better first name basis with it, because it's not going anywhere until after you do. Namaste.